For some of the younger people here who may not know about the Nazi hunter, Simon Wiesenthal was born in Buchach, a city next to Lvov or Lemberg. He married his childhood sweetheart, Sila, and he trained as an architect before World War II. He was also a Jewish activist in the years leading up to World War II. And in 1940, his life and everything and almost everyone that was dear to him basically was destroyed. In May 1945, when the United States Army reached Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, Simon Wiesenthal was free, quote unquote. He weighed about 40 kilo. He was too weak to stand. Probably another week or 2 weeks, he would have been dead. He was liberated on May 3rd, 1945. When you come to our museum in LA, and we have, since he passed, brought his office, the entire office, and reconstituted it in our museum, there's an amazing document. That document is from May 25th, 1945, about 2 weeks after he was liberated. That document was Simon Wiesenthal's first memo to the occupation authorities with a list of names of Nazi war criminals and to bring them before the bar of justice. What's so interesting is that some of the American officers who were later interviewed said their initial response to Wiesenthal was, "Zenebuch, the guy can barely walk, and he keeps talking about these terrible crimes that took place, and he would keep showing up every day to the office." And they said, initially more out of pity than anything else, they let him come, and they let him say, "Sure, if you want to do some investigating, by all means, you can give it to us and we'll look up on it." So I want to tell you a few vignettes about Wiesenthal in that era, starting with the first case that he was involved with. I asked him once, "Simon, tell me about the first case." So he said that about 3 months after the end of the war, the commanding officer of the camp, he wasn't yet in the DP camp, said, "Okay, you say that you want to go after Nazi war criminals? We found one. So I know it's very difficult. I've managed to get you a driver and a Jeep. And your job is you're going to go and arrest the Nazi war criminal and bring him back here." Well, he called Wiesenthal's bluff. What's he going to say? "I'm too weak, I can't go, I don't know." He gets into the Jeep. They drive for about 15 minutes and pull up. And when he said, "I saw this house," my heart sank. He said, because it was 4 flights. And I didn't think I had the physical strength to get up, of course, to the 4th floor apartment where Schultz was sitting. So he described that it took him about 15 minutes to schlep up the 4 flights of stairs, and then another 5 minutes on the 4th floor landing before he could catch his breath and have enough koyach to go over and knock on the door, which he did. And when the door opened, this huge man in an cut-out undershirt opens the door, and Simon says, Herr Schultz, jawohl, come with me. I arrest you in the name of the Jewish people and the United States Army." This former SS officer. So what's Schultz's reaction? "Is it okay if I get my shirt first?" Puts on his shirt, and then he said, "Since I couldn't convince the driver to come up with me, it suddenly dawned on me, I don't have a pistol, I don't know how to use it. I'm here with a man till 3 weeks ago who held life and death, usually death, over our people. I can barely stand. The man puts on his shirt, closes the door, and he said, I have to tell you that the SS officer basically had to carry me down the 4 flights to drive off. It's an important story to think about the nature of evil, people who hold power as evildoers, and what happens to them the day after they no longer hold power. But if you think for a second, Wiesenthal probably belonged in a hospital to recuperate. It was absolutely a remarkable event. 2 more stories, 3 more from that era. We have a film division called Mariah Films. Imagine I work for a boss, Rabbi Marvin Heyer, who's a big Talmud Chacham, and he's a visionary. Imagine working for a boss who also has 2 Oscars in his office. So we produce these great documentaries. And after Simon passed away, we did a filmic biography, an appreciation of Simon Wiesenthal. And in it is a remarkable vignette that was told over by a gentleman who looked absolutely as the perfect Aryan, blonde, blue-eyed guy. And Simon Wiesenthal was on to Eichmann very early, before people even really knew his role. He understood Eichmann's role. And Eichmann's wife, already in 1947 and 48, was trying to get her husband declared dead. Simon Wiesenthal insinuated a young man into the inner circle of the Eichmann family. One day, he came back to Simon and he said, I gained the trust of Mrs. Eichmann. I took one of his sons out today on the lake, in the rowboat. Tomorrow, I'm going back. I'm taking that son out in the rowboat, and I'm going to kill him. I'm going to drown him. I want to take revenge for all of the family that I lost, and no one's going to stop me. And Simon told him, you're not going to do that. That little boy is innocent. That's not our way. That's not why you're in the middle of that family unit. And you can't go there. You can't do it. In the end, he did not do it. But this is a story, an incident that took place 24 months after liberation, when Simon thankfully had been reunited with his wife 3 months after the war, but between them, they lost 89 members of their families. And he tells this young man, don't do it. One other story that sums up a great deal about the complexity of Simon Wiesenthal's work. A few months after the end of the war, when he was already in a DP camp in the American zone, a group of former Jewish resistance fighters came to see him. Even back then, there weren't too many Nazi hunters. After the Shoah, the people who could simply wanted to get better, get as far away as they could from all, and try to figure out some way to put their lives together. But Wiesenthal really never left the Shoah. So this group comes to him, and they have a list of 10 Nazi war criminals. And the head of the group says, Simon, here are the names. All we need are the addresses. We'll take care of the rest. Mr. Wiesenthal said to them, I'm not going to cooperate with you. I said, what are you talking about? You see the names on this list? What they did to our people, to your families, not just ours? What do you mean you're not going to cooperate? I said, look, tell me, how many Nazi war criminals do you think you'll be able to kill? 60, 600, 6,000? Sooner or later, the occupying powers here in Germany, they're going to stop you. They're going to arrest you and put you in jail. And then what will the press say? I can already see the headline. From 1939 to 1945, the Germans and their helpers murdered 6 million Jews. And then from 1945 to 46, the Jews managed to kill 60, 600, or 6,000 Nazis. He says, that's not what we just experienced. That's not why we survived. I'm not going to cooperate with you. Decades later, they had a reunion at Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot, north of Haifa. Most of the members of that original group came up to him. They shook hands. It's in the 80s. And he said, we don't really know how you figured all of that out back in 1946. But we recognize that you did the right thing, and we appreciate what you did. The person who headed up the group, however, refused to shake Simon Wiesenthal's hand. He said, Simon, remember the list? 4 of those names, those people were never captured. I hold you responsible for the fact that they were never captured. That's a story related by Simon Wiesenthal. When he spoke, especially to young people, it would ask, can it happen again? Can the Holocaust ever happen again? And certainly the crime of genocide, of mass murder, of crimes against humanity. I remember when I went to Kurdistan to help, believe it or not, the Iraqi government create an exhibition on the 20th anniversary of the gassing of the Kurds by Saddam Hussein. Well, I looked it up. It was still pre-Google days. But I looked for people who spoke out in real time at that gassing. Simon Wiesenthal was one of the few. And he said back then, do you know that tyrants will interpret the silence of the world differently? When you think back of our collective history, could you imagine if there had been a coalition of the willing in 1985 to take out Saddam Hussein right then and there? The world would be a completely different place. And that's really a kind of key to understanding Wiesenthal's motivation, which is he always felt that the prosecutions, the arrests, the coverage of the Nazi war criminals would serve as a wake-up call and a warning to future generations in other places, even when the perpetrators were not Nazis and the victims were not necessarily Jews. So to the question, could it happen again? This is an amazing thing because his answer predated the internet by 3.5 decades. He said, if you have hate, plus technology, plus a crisis, anything is possible. He said that back in 1492, and beyond that, in that era, if the technology that the Nazis had was available in Spain, he said no Jew had survived in Spain, no Catholic had survived in England, no Protestant survived in France. Finally, Simon Wiesenthal could be accused of many things, but no one ever accused him of being an Orthodox Jew. He really enjoyed telling ribald Jewish Yiddish jokes to Rabbi Heyer and myself. Usually waited till about 38,000 feet when he was trapped. And I can't even repeat most of those stories in private, let alone in mixed company. So I apologize. But trust me, they were truly classic. But Simon Wiesenthal was a person who had a relationship with God and someone who especially appreciated being around Jewish kids. He was a tough man, so tough that when Eichmann, the announcement came that Eichmann had landed in Israel, the Nazis threatened Simon Wiesenthal's only daughter with death. She was quickly spirited to Israel. Simon's wife had a heart attack, and in the hospital, she said to him, "Simon, you promised me 3 or 4 years, and then we would get the hell out of this place. Well, now we have Eichmann. You did your share. Let's go to Israel. We belong so we can enjoy the rest of our lives." Mr. Wiesenthal told his bedridden wife, "I can't leave. I'll come twice a year to see you and our daughter." And she said to him, "You know, I feel like you have 2 wives. You're married to me, and you're married to 6 million ghosts." So he never left. And I always said that if there ever was going to be a Nobel Prize, it should have gone to Mrs. Wiesenthal, not Simon, because she never wanted to be there. And in fact, the last time I was here, I remember it was here in Melbourne on Saturday night. I had just begun to speak when someone burst in and said, "Did you hear that the neo-Nazis blew up Simon's house in Vienna on Friday night?" I obviously had not known because of Shabbat. Luckily, he and Sila were in the back room, but they did try in the end to kill them. And when they used to ask him, "Simon, why don't you just do your job from Geneva, Tel Aviv, London, New York?" He said, "If you want to drain a swamp from mosquitoes, you have to be right in the middle of the action." And I recall the first time I saw him in Vienna, I was staying at the Intercontinental, and he said, "Okay, I pick you up at 10 a.m. I was so excited, so nervous. I waited downstairs, and he came in from the opposite end, about the length of this room. And when he came in, hulking presence, he started screaming, Ab. So I ran across the hotel lobby. He said, "Simon, everything okay?" I said, "Sure, everything's fine." So, why are you shouting?" "I will tell you. I want he should know I came into the room. I want that person to know. I want he should know." Amazing, amazing man. So as a person who wasn't religious, let me tell you about the siddur that Simon had on his night table. In the winter of 1945-46, and we have survivors here tonight who can tell you directly, it was a bitter, very bitter winter. He was already in the DP camp, and he was called in by the commanding U.S. officer and said, "Mr. Wiesenthal, we've been hearing rumors that there's this place in the forest here in Germany that contains a lot of Jewish memorabilia. It took me a while, but I've commandeered a truck, and I'm going to send you the driver as well as the chief Jewish chaplain of this region to go with you. In this weather, it's probably going to take you at least 2 hours to get there. Go check it out." 2.5 hours later, in the forest, they came upon this medieval castle. And when they opened the doors, their worst fears came true, because from the floor to the ceiling, 3 flights worth plus a basement, were the only remnants of thousands and thousands of Jewish families. Shabbat Leichter, Kiddush cups, Talmuds, they just stood there agape. Finally, Simon said, "Look, we were sent here with a mission. Clearly, this is going to take a lot more time, but we need to start somewhere. So let's divide up the castle. I'll take the first floor. The driver," of course, Simon took the first floor. He wasn't good with steps yet. The driver went down into the basement, and the clergyman went up to the second floor. Not 2 minutes had passed when Simon heard a yell, a scream from the second floor, and a thud. Rushed up the stairs as fast as he could, and there was the Jewish chaplain, had fainted on the floor, and in his hand was clutched a siddur. When they brought him to, he couldn't speak. He just asked Simon to read the Yiddish inscription. And what it said was, "Whoever gets the siddur, please see to it that my brother receives it. The murderers are amongst us. I can hear them in the next house. Never forget us. Never forget our lives. Revenge our deaths." It was signed by the sister of that clergyman. Years later, when he passed away, the family unanimously decided to send the siddur to Simon Wiesenthal, and he told me that that's the siddur he kept next to his bed for the rest of his life. In 1977, I came with Rabbi Heyer to Los Angeles to help start the Yeshiva University of Los Angeles and a new little project called, what we hope would be, a museum on the Holocaust. In the middle of the summer, Rabbi Heyer disappeared, flew off to Vienna, came to see Simon Wiesenthal, who he always felt was an unsung hero of the Jewish world, and said, "Mr. Wiesenthal, King Solomon has written that a good name is more precious than oil. I'm here to take your good name." Simon said, "Not so fast. What do you plan to do at this museum? If it's a place where people come to light the Yahrzeit candles twice a year, beautiful. I'll give you a letter of endorsement. But if you want my name, I'm an activist. And if you're prepared to be activists, I know you would help me with the old Nazis. That's a given. But I also want you to be involved in what's going on today and in looking at the future, because I remember as a Jewish student, when we heard about this guy Hitler, a funny man with a mustache and ranting, listening to his rantings on the radio, our early responses to Hitler were Jewish jokes. By the time we woke up to the real threat, it was too late. So if you want my name, I want you to be activists as well. And of course, when Rabbi Heyer came back and reported that, for me, it fit right in because I basically was a Jewish punk who grew up in the streets of New York and spent my time trying to do something for the 3 million Jews in the Soviet Union. So activism was a part of that era. Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, and a number of really courageous and creative young Jews who didn't wait for the establishment to catch up. I was not one of them. I was just a teenager, but that's the path that I followed. The Simon Wiesenthal Center has full status at the United Nations and at UNESCO and other international agencies. I remember, since I testified before a committee of 20 countries, when we applied to become non-governmental organizations, and the vote came back 20-0 in our favor, I turned to my colleague on the way out, since I grew up demonstrating outside the UN, against the UN, I turned to him and said, "You know, I'm not sure whether I should be happy and proud that we got a 20-0 vote and say Hallel, or if I'm going to have to clop another Al Chet on Yom Kippur because these you-know-who voted unanimously, including Algeria, to allow us in." In 2001, the United Nations announced that for the first time ever was going to convene a major international human rights anti-racism conference in Africa. And together with my colleague, Dr. Shimon Samuels, I traveled to Durban, South Africa in late August 2001, and I thought this will be just a great opportunity, 3,900 NGOs, and a chance for me to do what I really like to do, spend time with Arabs, Muslims, and others to find people we can do business with in the Menschlichkeit and human rights field. So I'll just recount to you my very first experience at that ill-fated event. I had just gotten my credentials when a gentleman slightly older than myself saw my yarmulke, came over, and he said, "Are you from Israel?" I said, "Well, no, I'm from Los Angeles." "Oh, my name is so-and-so. I'm the former bureau chief of Al Aram, the Egyptian New York Times." And we got to speaking, and this wonderful man wanted to talk about the experiences he had because he was on the plane with Anwar Sadat when they flew to Israel and when Sadat spoke at the Knesset in Jerusalem. An unbelievable experience, and I said to myself, wow, was I smart to come here? Look at this, just unbelievable. I mean, what a connection. So as we're schmoozing, Ahmed walks by from Al Dastur newspaper in Jordan. The elder statesman says, "Come on over, Ahmed, I want to introduce you to someone." And the way it works at the UN conferences, you have a badge, and thank God they usually have your name large enough that you can read it. And he said, "This is Ahmed so-and-so from Al Dastur in Amman, and this is Abraham Cooper from the Simon Wiesenthal Center." In the middle of the handshake, this young man pulls his hand back and says, "Wait a second, are you a Jew?" I said, "Yes." He wipes his hand off on his jacket and says, "I never would have agreed to shake your hand if I knew you were a Jew," turned around and walked away, to the astonishment and deep chagrin of his fellow Arab journalist. Everything that we're confronted with today in terms of BDS, in terms of the big lie of Israel apartheid, everything that we're fighting against today was codified in Durban, in the very place where we were going to supposedly build a better civil society. It was the majority of 3,900 NGOs who allowed the event to be hijacked by people who were no longer just there to criticize Israeli policies, but they were there to question the very validity of a Jewish state altogether. So today, your students, your kids or grandchildren, nieces and nephews, are likely to hear in history class or at seminars on campus that the State of Israel was created after World War II by the former colonial powers as a kind of booby prize for the Shoah out of some sort of guilt. And as a result, the poor indigenous population of Arabs were kicked out. And the truth is that Israel is nothing more than a colonialist historic mistake. And mistakes can be corrected. If you've ever heard of a term called the Palestine-Kairos document, if you haven't, please Google it and look it up. That document also has its roots in Durban, because in churches, colonialism is not really the operative term, but theology is. And the Palestine-Kairos document basically identifies Israel as a theological mistake. It's an error. And it says to Christians who are supporters of Zion and support the State of Israel that they are guilty of a theological sin. One more story about that remarkable experience. Like here in Melbourne, and wherever I travel the world, the first place you look for are fellow Jews. And in Durban, there was this fantastic Jewish community center. And it really was our city of refuge. We had grown men crying. It was a very tough physical altercations. It was the worst public anti-Semitic display since the end of World War II. But when we came to the JCC, it was like an ir miklat, a good kosher meal, camaraderie, everything that's good about being Jewish. On Friday morning, the chief of police of Durban came over to me on the rugby pitch, which was the main location for most of our meetings, and said, "Rabbi, please, I have to ask you not to go to the JCC this morning." It was 2 blocks away. I said, "What do you mean?" "I cannot guarantee your safety. They've just brought in by train 17,000 people from Cape Town to have an anti-Zionist rally." I'm not sure how many of the 17,000 even knew what Zionism was. Organized by the Israel apartheid gangs, and it's too dangerous for you to walk. I have to ask you and the other Jewish delegates to please stay in place. And I remember looking out from the high point in the stadium and seeing this big banner under the rubric of international human rights. Hitler was right. And then on Saturday night, the delegates had a vote on the final document to give to the nations that were taking over, the diplomats taking over the next morning. In this 250-page plus document were 2 sentences added in. It said that it expressed their concern over the fact that synagogues in France had been firebombed in the year 2000. If you remember, the Troubles began right about then in the mixed neighborhoods surrounding Paris. We were now a grand total of 13 Jewish representatives. A lot of people had just left, correctly so. So there were 3,900 delegates, and as you know, Zionists, we like to surround the enemy. We sprinkled ourselves in the audience. At about 10 p.m., a delegate who's a citizen of Israel, a Christian from Nazareth, stepped up to the microphone in the audience and said, "I want to bring to the attention something here doesn't make any sense." Says something here about synagogues being firebombed in France. I thought this is an anti-racism conference. What does that have to do with racism? I moved to strike the entire 2 sentences from the final document, and by voice acclamation, it was removed. Instinctively, all 13 of us got up simultaneously and walked out to the catcalls and whistles of our compatriots in the human rights movement. Friends, Dr. Manfred Gerstenfeld is based in Jerusalem, big scholar, prolific author. He presents, I think, compelling evidence based on serious research and polling that today, somewhere in the vicinity of at least 150 million Europeans harbor extreme anti-Israel and/or anti-Semitic views.